In high school, I was part of art club, and we did lots of things together and shows, and would decorate the local mall at Christmas time together. And we'd always have an awards banquet at the end of the year. And one of our really fine artists had put together this incredible display that he worked the whole semester on. And our teacher somehow got mixed up. And when she introduced the whole project, she named someone completely different. And I remember looking at him, the one that had done the project, and everyone was looking at the teacher like, "You've got this wrong," but no one said anything. And I looked at him, but then I really noticed his parents and how sad they felt for their son. And it was just one of those reminders that in life, you don't always get the reward you think you deserve, right? Life is messy, and life is not always in sequence. Sometimes you get the accolades, sometimes you do the work, and nothing happens. This story that you heard about Moses is a similar story. It also reminds me of my own father, who I knew that he and my grandfather struggled in their relationship. Always seemed at odds. My dad was the oldest and had been a super achiever when he was young. And years after he had died, and I was traveling alone with my dad's younger brother, my dad's brother said, "You know, your dad never got a fair shake from our dad. He could do nothing right. He's the one that did everything. I was crazy when I was a kid, and yet my dad let me off of everything." And he sort of, he says, "Then I became a doctor, and that was the thing that my dad really loved. And so it was almost as if he didn't have any other children. He would only talk about his son, the doctor." And he said, "I always felt bad for your dad. He never held it against me, but I knew he felt it." I said, "How did you know he felt it?" He says, "At my parents' 60th anniversary," and I remember that, in church, my grandpa stood up and thanked every family member for being there. And he named all the grandchildren, the in-laws. He went through the whole list of everybody that was there. And I remember thinking, "Oh, that was sweet." Took a little while in church, but he was sweet. And then my Uncle Jack said, "You know what? He left off one name. Your dad." I said, "Oh my gosh, I never knew that." He says, "Yeah, he left his..." I said, "Do you think my dad noticed?" And he said, "We all noticed." There is this sense that when you've done the work, there should be some, people don't usually do it for that, but it's nice to have that kind of acknowledgement. Don't you agree? Think about Moses. I mean, this guy he had escaped slavery. He was on the run from having killed a person, went to the mountain, was comfortable being a shepherd with his father-in-law in the desert, and then has this experience where God says, "Go back down, Moses. Let my people go." And Moses is like, "Me? Yes, you." So he goes back down, and he becomes a catalyst for the liberation of his people. And then he gets to where they need to be, and God says, "I got more work for you. You come to the mountain again, because we got to organize here." and you are in chaos. And so Moses comes down with 10 commandments to help organize community, to create them not just as freed slaves, but as a new people. And then they're wandering the desert, we see, for 40 years, trying to get to this promised land that's out there on the horizon somewhere. And in the passage you just heard from Deuteronomy, Moses is standing there, and the voice from God says, there it is. There's the promised land. And Moses says, I'm ready. Lead us in. And God says, you're not going. He says, what? What do you mean I'm not going? No, you've trained Joshua and Caleb, and they're going to be leading the way from now on. Whoa. I mean, he didn't do it for himself, but he did it out of obedience. But it must have felt like an awful thing. He was going to die there. He could look, but not touch. The view from his vantage point made it all clear where they were going. But he wasn't to be a part of it. The thing I like about this story is that that is the way real life often is, isn't it? It doesn't wrap up neatly at the end. We want it to, and we have in our minds certain scenarios of how it can, but when it doesn't, we're disappointed, and yet that seems to be the normal part of life. You know, this dog happens every Sunday at the same time. I should just put an interlude in my sermon. That's good. Yeah, hi. But here's one of the interesting things about this passage. Most of the passages that we've looked at about Moses have come from Exodus. This one comes from Deuteronomy. And that may not mean much to you, but it means something to me. Because most of Exodus was written around the 9th or 10th century BC. The time of David and Solomon. The time when Israel was at its height. And they're looking back and telling the story of liberation. But they're at their height. Deuteronomy is a completely different story. It's written some 400 or 500 years later. Deuteronomy, in fact, means second law. Deutero and nomos, right? So it's the second law. The Israelites had been in captivity in Babylon. Their temple had been completely destroyed. And the Babylonians had finally agreed to release them. And they were back home. And they were back home to ruins. They were standing in ruins. And they were grieving because before the exile, there had been a king named Josiah who had done major reforms. And those reforms were redacting the 10 Commandments into very specific laws that were intricate and that guided their whole community. And that had been lost. No one had any record of those. They had been destroyed when the temple had been destroyed. And here they were standing on the ruins, wondering who they were going to be from that point on. And guess what they discovered in the ruins? Documents. Documents. Josiah's reform. The second law. Deuteronomy. And so out of the ruins came order again. And one of the things that it said was that things ebb and flow in power and lack of power. But when that occurs, you must be willing to release and let the next generation carry on. So Deuteronomy used the Moses story as a way of saying, it's okay. You've got this next leg. You think that it's all over. You think there's nothing left. But what's coming, you don't see yet, but it's good, and it's in God's hands. What a powerful message. So for Moses, it's about the walls coming down in Jericho. For the Israelites coming back into Jerusalem 500 years after Exodus was even written, at the time of Deuteronomy, it's about rebuilding. It's about recreating, becoming community again. And it's saying, the old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. It is the rhythm of life. Where this really comes out for me as a pastor is when I talk to people that are at the point of death, on the deathbed. And we all, most of us anyway, have had that encounter in our personal lives with loved ones, with family members. Some of us have been there holding their hand at the moment they took their last breath. And there is this sense of finality, of, oh no, it's gone. A part of me is gone. But there's also often, in a strange way, this feeling of, well, no, it's not. There's more. I'm here, and there are folks after me that will come. And what will they do? They will rebuild. They'll be more. They'll come up with things that I never came up with. Each generation will find something new to move toward and to change. And so the rhythm of seeing but not touching is okay. The legacy we leave is not just through the great things that we do. It's the little things. I always think of it like, little things that we do in life, and it flows out from us. Like I with courage. When you pass on love. And she's going to go out today and pass on love somewhere. I won't be attached to that. It's left me. And yet it's part of me, too. And it's part of you because you were here as a part of that. And then that will be touched somewhere and somewhere else. And so each of those movements continue on, even after we die. They may not be attached to our names. They may not be part of the talk story that we would have told, but the legacy of love, the legacy of caring, the legacy of compassion goes beyond. We all have that. And so in some ways we are all Moses standing at the precipice. And we're also all Joshua moving forward. We are all the Israelites standing in the ruins of the temple. And we are all the Israelites discovering the law is buried under the debris, the very thing we need to go forward. And we all, I believe, have the capacity to do the same thing in our own lives. Even if we don't have children ourselves, we touch people in different ways. Everyone leaves a legacy. with love and beauty. We get to choose the kind of legacy, right? And I had a friend who said, well, everyone leaves a legacy. The question is, what kind do you want to leave? You get to sort of decide that. Are you going to be the jerk and everyone remembers the jerk stuff, or are you going to be the one that was remembered for loving, for compassion? So the Moses story is our story. And I encourage you to see that the stories of Moses is your story of legacy as well. And to think about all the ways you are a legacy. There's a poem that I like by a woman who just wrote a few poems, and every once in a while I would read it as a part of a funeral. Her name, she took on it was Merritt Malloy, which I thought was a male name, but it's a female. Look her up, Merritt Malloy. And she has a poem where she says, when I die, if you want to live my legacy, don't mourn for me. Touch children. Touch the earth. Find ways to love. Look people in the eye when you talk to them. See them. Hear them. Help them remember that they are important. And when you do that, you are my legacy. Amen.